It looks like you're muted, Mayo. Mayo, you're muted.
Oh, apologies for that.
Yeah, now you're fine, yes.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone joining us from around the world. I welcome you all to a EcoCarbon webinar series on climate change. So at EcoCarbon, we strive to help projects and activities that are reducing emissions, supporting livelihood, and promoting nature to leverage on climate finance and carbon finance as well. So aside from that aspect, we also help our businesses and organizations to achieve their net zero targets through data-driven technology. So as part of our effort to raise awareness on climate change, we usually host a monthly webinar series to share expert knowledge on climate finance, environmental protection, and other related climate action plans. So today, in honor of World Wetland Day, that's always take place on February 2nd, our guest speakers will be exploring the topic on how we can protect wetland ecosystem in a changing climate. So we are so glad to have our esteemed guest speakers with us. Before we start, we would like to give them opportunity to introduce themselves and provide the audience with more insight into their expertise and background. And also, if you have any questions for our speakers, please fill out the chat box and we'll try to get answers from them as soon as possible. I really appreciate you all from joining, wherever you are really joining us from. So you can drop your question on all our social media. We just locate the chat box, drop your question, then we'll pick it up from there. Okay, let us go to the business of today. We want the first speaker to introduce herself to us, Cleopatra Agboro. She's the steering committee member, Green Action Nigeria. So please, could you please introduce yourself, Mrs. Cleopatra Agboro? The floor is yours now.
Okay, I will go ahead. My name is Cleopatra Agboro. I am a co-founder and steering committee member of Green Action Nigeria. And basically, we're an environmental advocacy group that's based in Lagos, Nigeria. Our primary goal is to protect the environment, one, and it creates awareness of the economic benefits of conservation to the common citizen. We've been doing some work around wetlands, and that is the reason that I've been invited to speak here today. Thank you. Over to you, Moiwa.
All right, thank you very much for that brief introduction. Okay, I move to the next speaker, Tomani Manu Ufla. Please, will you please introduce yourself before move to the next speaker? Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Tomani Manungufara, and I'm based here in South Africa, in Cape Town. And I'm currently serving as a researcher for Parliament of the Republic of South Africa. I am an environmental scientist by profession. I have worked across all spheres of government and the private and public sector. I have worked as a consultant in the environment and construction and so on. Currently, my interests as a researcher lies in the sustainable development, energy just transition, and climate change. I have published a number of, if you follow me, then you will see that I've published a number of books but around issues of governance into water resources and so on and so forth. So insofar as wetland conservation is concerned, I used to head a program here called Working for Wetlands in South Africa, which deals with the rehabilitation of wetlands in general. And so that is something that I've done for like 5 years, and I continue to contribute to NGOs and civil society like I'm doing today with you guys. So I'm sort of an activist as well on the side that I give back to communities. So this all I do for free. So that is something that resonates with who I am. So with that, I thank you.
All right. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Tomani. Really appreciate you for joining us today. I'll quickly do a brief introduction about the topic that we are actually looking at, protecting wetlands from changing climates. So I'll quickly look at the wetland per se. So why do we actually pick this topic? What's the essence of why do we need to protect the wetland? So wetlands are essential for the livelihood of millions of people in sub-Saharan Africa. We notice that they provide water for crops and livestock, and they also help to protect against flood and droughts. However, wetlands are under threat from human activities such as deforestation, think of it, farming and mining. As we all are aware too that climate change is an ever-growing problem that threatens not only our future, but the future of the planet. So wetlands play a vital role in mitigating the effect of climate change. And so it is essential that we protect this wonderful habitat or ecosystem. This webinar series is actually looking at how can we create awareness on wetland conservation and encourage people to take action by protecting this precious ecosystem. So we can help ensure a more resilient Africa in the face of climate change if we protect 77% of wetland that we have all over the world. So more of this, our speakers will be able to share insight about what do we really need, including policymakers and the leaders in Africa, what they need to do in order to protect this ecosystem. So I will quickly move to the question or the business of today, where I'll be asking our first speaker on the action plan for wetland and what is this wetland, because some of our listeners might not even understand the word wetland. So what is this wetland? Why do we need to protect wetland? So what's the significance of wetland ecosystem to Africa community? So I hope Mr. Tomani can pick that question up and try to give us insight about wetland ecosystem in Africa, the need for us to protect the wetland. So the floor is yours, Mr. Tomani. Can you just give us our answer to that? What is the significance of wetland ecosystem to Africa community? Please, may go ahead.
Thank you very much for that, Program Director. This is a very fundamental and very important question that we as wetlands people and wetland professionals, we must understand. The wetlands are very, very important to the African communities. The relationship between the African communities and wetlands is as old as the creation of the earth itself. There are communities that are entirely dependent on the wetlands for their social, cultural, spiritual, economic, and environmental needs. For example, wetlands are known to be very rich in biodiversity, highly productive ecosystems, which make a great source for nutrients and medicines and many other materials. There is a spiritual connection between wetlands and some of the African communities. For example, here in South Africa, we have got a lake called Lake Funduzi, which is a cornerstone of the spiritual and cultural needs of the surrounding communities. there are rituals that these people, they perform at this lake. And these communities, they believe that a lake brings a stability, fulfillment, and prosperity. This is but one example of many wetlands across the continent that are very important in everyday lives of the African communities. Another example that I can give, it's a lake called, it's a wetland called Sad, which is also a World Heritage Site as classified by UNESCO. It is found in South Sudan. This wetland, it's surrounded by a number of tribes. If I may mention a few of them, it's the tribes of Nua, the Dinka, the Shilluk, the Anyuk. All these tribes are Nilotic and pastoralist, which are indigenous to the Nile Valley. These groups have developed traditions that have allowed them to adapt to the seasonal variable conditions of the sun through a combination of nomadic agro-pastoralism, timber, forest product collection, and fishing. And all these issues are very, very important to these communities. And to also indicate again in the same wetland, the cultural groups living within this region also maintain beliefs, practices that serve to support and conserve the environment they live in. For an example, the Shilluk tribe believes that the Nile liche, which is an animal, which is an antelope. It looks like a kudu, those who know the kudu. So they believe that it's not supposed to be killed. And this belief helps in the conservation of the wetland. So they maintain the habitat of this animal because it's very important to their belief system. So this is in a nutshell, the importance of the wetlands to the African community. Thank you so much for that question.
All right, thank you for sharing that wonderful insight about wetland. I'll move straight to Cleopatra. What do you think about the question, or what do you have to say on the question? Are you still there?
Thank you. I just had to mute. Yes, I'm here. I had to mute myself. I want to bring it specifically down to our own environment, which is Lagos. What is the significance of the wetlands that we actually have here? Firstly, if you live in Lagos, you have suffered a journey through traffic and floods, yes? So the wetlands actually help with flood mitigation. But because we actually live on the island, some of us, and we're low-lying, we have a high floods. These wetlands actually help us, or the mangroves actually mitigate by actually being what they call sponges and collecting the water. A lot of Lagosians survive, use what we call well water, yes? And these wetlands are what they call the kidneys of the water system. They actually clean that water. We know that the fishing industry, and I'm talking about from Lagos State, according to Lagos State, the fishing industry is worth at least 240,000 USD millions of dollars, yes, and supports 9,000 artisan fishermen across Nigeria. Those wetlands actually are what we call supporting in terms of they're the fish habitat, the habitat where the fish grow their babies and actually help us. For a lot of those who are fishing on the lagoon, you know that the lagoon is full of mangroves, and that's where the babies, the fish leave their eggs. And so it affects the amount of fish that we have in the water. Obviously, there's climate change. And then the last thing about biodiversity, and I must agree with Tomani, one of our projects, and I'll finish with an example of one of our projects in terms of just the medicinal, in terms of our African culture, a lot of the wetlands or the mangroves have a lot of plants that are used in some of our herbalists use them to make different types of medicines. Once we don't have that, and a lot of us Africans still rely on that system of using herbalists for different ailments. So it's actually important for us in terms of conserving the wetlands and actually understanding that this is what they do for the African community, not just the climate change, not just the water treatment, not just the flood mitigation, or economically, the fishing industry, also climate change and part of our own traditional aspects, which are, using herbal and also food, because a lot of these wetlands in Lagos provide not just, I'm going to speak from Lagos because that's where we are based, but across Nigeria, yes? Things like periwinkle, which are a common ingredient in some of the Nigerian soups. That is where a lot of these women actually harvest them. So it is part of our community in terms of the way we live and the way we survive, and also the way we work and the way we actually make a living. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think you've already picked out various points that we need to dive deep into, most especially in the areas that it's our wetland ecosystem, the provision of most essential basic amenities when it comes to feeding, is also providing support for our community around where we have wetlands. So we depend on that particular ecosystem in order to survive. So I would like to ask, I'm going back to you. You mentioned a lot around Lagos State, and you can see that most especially the people that are into real estate, they are taking opportunity to take over this ecosystem. They are looking at a way of filling the wetland portion we have in Lagos State. What will be the risk? What can you suggest to them? Because they are not looking at the risk side, or let me say the impact of that on the environment. They are just looking at the profitability. So what can you say about that? What should the government do in order to protect the wetland with regards to that when it comes to land use law of Lagos State? Do you have anything to say to that?
I want to answer that question with an example of a project that we partnered with Lucky Bird Club and various different organizations of the wetlands or the mangroves that had been dug up at the National Theatre whilst renovating the National Theatre. The National Theatre is something of an icon here in Lagos. Now, how did it affect all the stakeholders around the National Theatre? The first thing, and some of this is anecdotal and some of this has been sort of seen as research, and actually different groups have come up with ideas. So for example, in that area where just a small part, and that wasn't, if you look at it, we know the power of a small piece of wetlands or mangrove, but in that area, the water system changed. There were reports from mothers saying they can no longer feed their children water from those wells. And economically, they now have to buy pure water, yes? But again, what had happened up on top of the hill was the mangrove had been removed, yes? Okay. The Lucky Bird Club, they did a before and after exhibition, which showed the amount of wildlife in terms of birds that used to visit before when we had the mangrove. And now what comes there now that there isn't the mangroves, okay? And then finally, I talked about the women and the herbalists, that wetlands used to provide most of their, living, because the herbalists would go there and pick different types of medicines. That's their daily bread. That is how they make a living. Without those mangroves, they were not able to continue making a living, including also the women who pick periwinkle there. Again, not only is the water table affected, their source of daily income, which is picking the periwinkles and making the soup, is gone. So as much as we want to stand still and build in Lagos, I think what is the first thing that is important is to actually have a map. And I know there are people who have the map of the old traditional wetlands in Lagos, and actually look at where we have what is left first, okay? And then we can try and conserve it. Where we can replant, we can try and replant. There are organizations who are working on these types of projects, yes? And also how we can actually sensitize all these construction companies on what is a wetland? What does it do for us? How can you actually include it in your building or your renovation? Because I think there are ways that it's being done all over the world where there's best practice. And we can adopt that. We're not saying there's no issue about land in Lagos. There is, yes, because everybody wants a home. But also, how can we learn to coexist with nature? And nature that actually does a big job for us, yes, especially when we live on what looks like a floodplain during the rainy season. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Let me move straight to Tomani. I was looking at what South Africa government actually doing in order to protect the ecosystem, wetland ecosystem. But I understand that despite the fact government is trying to make law, but the citizen also, we human, the communities around that particular place where we have wetlands, they find it, they have a difficulty in getting energy. When we have energy crisis, definitely people have to fall back on their traditional ways of cooking, which is go to the forest, cut down trees, and they will be able to sustain themselves through that action. So how can the government play a major role, maybe in trying to sensitize people within the wetland region on the need to protect the wetland, and as well as trying to give them something beyond what they can take as a mileage, something that they can use instead of cutting down trees like clean cool stove and other energy efficiency efficient technology that they can leverage on in order to at least prepare their food in their house. So is there anything that government is doing in order to get that done in South Africa?
Yes, thank you for that question. I have just switched off my video there just to preserve the quality of the voice, because the load shedding this side, it's very difficult with the lack of energy. To come to your question around the role of government in the protection and conservation of wetlands in South Africa, we have got a fully fledged program. If you were listening when I started with my introduction, you would have heard that I spoke about the Working for Wetlands program, which is a nationally budgeted program, which is part of the National Revenue Fund funded type of a program, which is really aimed at conserving wetlands across the country. This program, it's funded, but it's run by communities themselves. Communities are employed to repair and restore damages in these wetlands. For an example, let's say a wetland is infested by alien plants, and these alien plants needs to be removed. Then the government appoints the members of the community, people who depend on that wetland, to go and cut these trees. And when they cut these trees, they get paid a certain stipend. And that we have learned that it has contributed to their livelihoods, and it has also managed to remove them from depending directly in the wetlands. And in a way, they are incentivized to look after the wetlands. So that is one example of what government is doing. The other issue again is issue around the policy. There is a fully fledged policy that cuts across all spheres of government, from local government up to national, where if you want to develop, then you have got to comply with certain regulations which are meant to develop, to protect the wetlands as well. So in other words, you will be told that you can't develop in a wetland. If you want to develop, there are areas or there are ways which are less intrusive to wetlands that one should follow. So that is the policy side. And the final one that I would like also to give is that it's a step in the right direction is around the budgeting and financing of wetlands conservation and rehabilitation. So this is something that I think the government of South Africa has gotten right, because they have managed to get it into the budgeting system of government, so that then they are seen as ecological infrastructures that should be maintained and protected through the finances of the country. I hope that summarizes the answer to that question. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I think governments are actually doing a lot also to protect this ecosystem. But I'll move back to Nigeria now. Cleopatra, there's also, I observed something around the monitoring and monitoring aspect of this ecosystem. How is government monitoring the ecosystem? How are they monitoring the wetlands? So what are the tools, what are the management tools for us to be able to ensure that there's no destruction, and also the habitat, biodiversities are also protected, like all the aquatic culture within the ecosystem of wetland are also protected, including the trees as well. Is there any monitoring pathway that government can look into that you might as well suggest to the government for them to look into what they are not doing that think they should incorporate into the system in order to get things right for Nigeria? Over to you.
First, I just want to say thank you to Mani for some of the ideas that you shared about what can be done in terms of improving what the government or organizations can do towards conserving the wetlands. Now, going into your question, Muiwa, I think that out there are organizations already that are out there doing the work. So what is important for government, I think, and the state governments as well, is actually partnering, for example, with the NCF, the Nigerian Conservation Federation, who do a lot of things. They have the tools. They actually can engage with construction companies. They can actually review before you even start building. There are certain things that need to be, questions need to be answered. Yes, in terms of, can you actually build here? Yes, but that again is something that the partnerships need to be there. One of the things that we're doing at Green Action is actually trying to put together what we call roundtables. And these roundtables are really to engage all stakeholders, yes, in each area. For example, in this wetlands area, we're trying to engage the different types of organizations who are doing different work. So people can understand that some of these things are there. We just need to connect with each other and not reinvent the wheel, okay? And from the point of Green Action, what would I say? How could we do things like effective monitoring? I think, again, we need to go back to the organizations that are working on the ground and also have the data and the information already, okay? But what is important on top of it is actually, I think, from the engagement of all stakeholders. Again, the common man. We cannot say we're conservationists or we are conserving something if we actually do not say to the common man, this is how it's affecting your pocket. Yes? How does flooding in Lagos affect your pocket? How does, for example, cutting down, because we need to use wood to burn. We're in that same situation with what Tomani said, load shedding. NEPA goes on and off. A lot of these communities are using some of this firewood to actually not just as income, but also for daily use. So how can we find programs that match up with, okay, fine. There's some, it's done in some countries where you can cut down the wetlands, but at the same time, we need to be replanting them at almost the same rates. So to get that information, we need to engage the stakeholders who are actually using this wood. Yes, it's one thing to think about it at policy level, but what is it happening on the ground? So for me, I would say we need to actually, if we're going to monitor and have good evaluation, we need to work with all stakeholders, and most importantly, the people who we say are cutting down the mangroves, whether they be construction people or people who are using it for livelihood. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Working with stakeholders is very essential. and also the community also, we need to speak with them. We need to sensitize them on the needs for us to protect this ecosystem. So we also look at, maybe I should just go straight to Mani. I was thinking Harry would be here before, but he hasn't show up. Maybe he's having difficulty with his network or he has other engagement. So we'll go back to Tomani. I'm looking at the carbon markets. So we have carbon markets where projects that are reducing emission can leverage in order to scale up, like what we are doing at EcoCarbon, and also other financial aspects, also like climate fund, green bond, and other essential climate finance pathway that has been set up by both UNEP, Africa Development Bank, and so on and so forth. There are funding out there. So is there any funding for wetland ecosystem in order to incentivize this ecosystem stakeholders? Let me say stakeholders now, people within that community. What can we do for them? Is there any plan? Is there any grant or any green fund for them in terms of maybe climate finance that we can use to incentivize them rather than relying on the government? We know that government will do their part, but is there any way we can also craft in something for these stakeholders that are very close to the ecosystem? In order to protect the ecosystem, we need to give communities something. So what do you say to that?
Thank you for that. The issue around the funding, apart from the government supported or sponsored funding, there are other institutions. For an example, the organizations like GIZ, WaterAid, amongst that have got programs that are geared towards funding wetlands conservation, wetlands rehabilitation, and so on and so forth. The other important things that through the United Nations Sustainable Development, there is a fund which is called SDG funding, Sustainable Development activities, which
No, not sure if I can hear you. Tomani, we can't hear you again. Maybe, I don't know, it might be your network. Okay, I think Henry is on the call. Henry, are you there? Please, can you unmute yourself, please? Just unmute your mic. Hi, Henry.
I think I got cut there while I was still speaking.
Okay, just that I can't hear you from my end. I'm not sure.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. It's clear now. It's better.
You can hear me?
Yes. Please go ahead, please.
Okay. I don't know whether you got the other information about the funding, the SDG fund, if you got that information.
Okay, maybe we'll come to that later. But before we go, I would like Henry also to introduce himself. Henry, are you on the call? Please, can you unmute your mic? Hi, Henry, are you there? Okay, let me just move straight back to second speakers, Cleopatra. So for the aspect of incentivizing the wetland ecosystem, is there any program that we can as well put in place in Africa for us to get funding from developed countries, and also for from Africa Development Bank per se, for them to be able to fund a program with regards to that? Is there anything we can put together to incentivize this action plan in protecting wetland ecosystem in Africa?
Sorry, Muya, was that a question for me? I did not hear the first part. Can you repeat it for me, please? Because I think the network is bad.
Yeah. So I'm talking about what policy can be employed to incentivize the conservation and restoration of coastal wetlands. So, can you hear me?
I don't think I can answer that right now, because there's a lot of things that we need to look at as all stakeholders in terms to incentivize. And I'm a believer of best practice, that there are things that are going across Africa right now that we can look at, because if we want to incentivize the users who use the mangroves and the wetlands economically as a form of income or jobs, how do we actually replace that income of jobs to incentivize them not to do it? If they want to do it, how can we, for example, use the example in South Africa where we changed the game in terms of conserving, because we actually do need the biodiversity for other things. Yes, the fishing communities, how do we incentivize them to look after the wetlands? So I think there's a lot of things, again, that we actually, first, there are different angles. We look at best practice. We bring all the players together, and we now come up with those incentives. Obviously, there are organizations already who are looking at the carbon credit area. And we too need to come and sit down with your organization to talk about this. Yes, I have a conversation. But again, I don't want to say these are the policies that I have, because at the end of the day, I always believe that the consensus, everybody involved, for us here, and I only speak for Lagos State because that's where we are. We can also speak for Nigeria if we want to, but we all need to come to the table and say, okay, this is what's happening with the SDGs. This is how we can find funding. These are carbon credits. This is how they work. And then try and incentivize these communities. But again, if there's no knowledge and sensitization of how this system works, I think we're always going to be at the beck and call of conservation. The wetlands are also going to suffer. And internally, we will suffer because we are all reliant on this same climate and environment to live.
Oh, thank you for that. Really appreciate that wonderful contribution. So I'm still looking at Harry. Harry, if you can hear me, please can you unmute your mic?
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a pleasure having me.
Oh, thank you. Not a problem. Just for us to make sure that also you contribute. And I'll quickly do briefing. I would like you to do a brief introduction of yourself before I ask you a question.
Yeah, I'm Henry David Bayo. I'm the national focal point for the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. I also work with the National Tourist Board as head of climate change. And I'm also the national focal point for the West African Alliance on Carbon Markets and Climate Finance. I'm based in Sierra Leone, to be precise, and I'm also heading the Institute of Environmental Management and Assessment, West Africa region, as the chair, and I'm a chartered environmentalist from AIMA. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Really appreciate your time. So we have been trying to look at a specific question. I think that question is supposed to be for you because I know that that's your area of expertise. So the question is on how we can employ, because I know West Africa Alliance, your focus is to drive climate finance in terms of carbon credit. And there's a lot of work you have done on clean cook stove. If and also there are also a certified pathway created for other projects within West Africa. So I'm now looking at blue carbon, which wetland ecosystem also is part of. So is there a way where Africa community can leverage on climate finance to protect and conserve this wetland ecosystem we are talking about? Is there a way we can do that? Is there a pathway through which we can go through in order to get a climate finance fund for the ecosystem?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. Of course, we know that the wetland can sequester twice as more carbon than the upland forest. So, considering the emergence of carbon markets, precisely Article 6, then there's been a lot of interest in the area of blue carbon and how can we restore, protect our wetland. But in terms of incentivizing wetland, of course, there is the need to consider the business case of protecting the wetland. In other words, basically, how can you introduce, in other words, generating wetland as taking into consideration the business aspect of it, creating employment. Because you know most of the residents within these coastal areas or around the wetland, they rely on this wetland for their livelihoods, and as a result of that, has been a lot of degradation of this wetland. But using the business case, some of these problems, how can we leverage transform these problems into opportunities? The ecosystem-based approach. Now we have a lot of funding opportunity being channeled towards blue carbon, mangrove restoration. The World Bank is working on an initiative called the Pro Blue, and also there's been a lot of studies within this area of blue carbon. Of course, there are finance available when it comes to carbon markets, the climate finance, or the market finance specifically, that are channeled towards this. But the problem has to do also with the political will in most of these African countries. The political will. Do we have the necessary policy framework? Because you have to have some strict regulation into how to protect some of these some of these wetlands, and ensure that there are good policies that will ensure the protection. Because if you want to introduce the business case aspect, there should be regulations and policies, and we even have wetlands under the Ramsar Convention which are gazetted, but most of these African countries are not adequately protecting the wetlands. People are using it for a lot of as wood fuel. So basically, how can we find alternative for these local communities? How can we create employment? One of the ecosystem services provided by this wetland has to do with employment, recreation. So basically, how can we promote ecotourism? This wetland bring in the much needed revenue. People might come from Bala. The wetlands has been habitat for migratory birds, has been a breeding ground for fisheries. And we know the importance of fish when it comes to nutrition. How can we engage that we protect some of our wetland? We breed our fishes, and now climate change is affecting the fish greatly. There has been a decline in the number of fish stocks, but wetland can help to solve that problem of fisheries. So basically, this is how we can do. How can we develop the fishery sector? And one key policy approach is the integrated approach, because wetland is very critical that you have key stakeholders at play. You have the fisheries, the marine sector, the tourism, the environment, the forestry sector. So you need to craft, you need to devise an integrated approach into managing this wetland. And all this area has income generating opportunities. For the tourism, I spoke of the tourism sector. We have ecotourism, bird watching. You develop your mangrove to people coming to do excursion, they pay. You generate income from this. If apart from the climate finance that is available, we pay. Even though climate finance has been challenged in terms of accessibility, but yes, I think if we have the necessary policies and you develop your key actions and devise your projects, there are ways you can access funding towards protecting this mangrove. But it has to do with the law, the policies to regulate the protection. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. That was so wonderful and insightful as well. So I think we are rounding up, but before we go, I would like us to give a final remark on what recommendation, just in 5 seconds, you think African leaders, businesses, and also policymakers can also do to protect or to preserve the wetland ecosystem. Let me start with Cleopatra. So in 5 seconds, what can we do right to protect this ecosystem? Just 5 seconds. Advice to government, policymakers, business. Go ahead, please.
I think that most importantly, I will say exactly what the former speaker said, which is, what is the business case of conservation? What is the economics of conservation? Yes, because if we look at it, conservation can be an area to provide employment. So my advice would be, let's look at where it's happening already in Africa. Yes, there's lots of best practice cases across Africa that are already happening. Before, even in terms of what Tomani said with the policies, let's emulate some of those policies. Let's get them into our government and let's start actually having budgets for organizations that are doing the work on the ground they can tap into. And then the last thing is, every stakeholder has to be.
Thank you. Every stakeholders have responsibility.
Hello, did you hear me? Because I think I got cut off.
Yeah, I think so. Maybe can you just give us 3 seconds recap on what you said?
Did you hear my last bit? Because I think my network just cut out.
No. Couldn't hear you. Please, can you just give 3 seconds, please?
Okay, I just said this, the last. Okay, so the first was obviously there's best practice across Africa. Let us look at it. Oh, it's not me, sorry.
Okay, all right. Move to next speakers. Tomani, just 5 seconds. What do you think on the policy makers and also government and also businesses can do right in order to protect this ecosystem? So floor is yours. 5 seconds, please.
Thank you for that. I think it's very important that we should start to consider the wetlands as critical ecological infrastructure that need to be maintained and sustainable such as such. Therefore, I think we need to mainstream the wetlands into national infrastructure development plans to ensure that they are protected. So that is, in a nutshell, something that we should really, our government leaders, communities and so on, they should strive to get these wetlands to the national development in terms of budgeting and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you so much for that. Okay, I'll move to the next speaker. Emery, 5 seconds remark before the close of this webinar for today. Just 5 seconds.
Yeah, thank you very much. Of course, what African governments need to do is first to stop the loss of wetlands, because we are losing the wetlands in a very fast pace. So we need to stop the wetland. The way at which wetland are being lost and degraded is very alarming. And that can be done through education, awareness raising, and making key decisions, informed decisions that are informed by data. What is presently available, what has been lost. And two is to prioritize the restoration of wetland. At the different national governments should prioritize it. How this should be done is to remove some of the stressors and pressure on wetland. And this can serve as a best practice to prevent further loss and degradation of the wetland. Then, of course, the law plays critical roles. We need to implement the laws. We need to review some of the laws. What are the punishment in these laws? And then stringent. Anyone find wanting degrading the wetland, I think the law needs to ensure compliance with these laws. Labs should be compliant. So these are few to then effective monitoring of what with and try to understand the appropriate role of Western restoration and how can we link it into our different development interventions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Henry. Really appreciate that. Thank you all for joining, wherever you are joining us from. If you have any question for our speakers, you can drop it here. If not, we are going to round up in the next 1 minute. Trying to check through all the social media platforms. Yes, any question? Okay, hello, Miss Henry. Hello, Henry, are you there?
Yeah, I'm there, I'm here.
Yeah, there's a question for you here. It's still back to carbon market. Somebody is asking, is it really feasible in Africa? Do you have any carbon market in Africa? Can you just give insight about that? Hello, can you hear me?
We do have. Yeah, I can hear you. We do have a carbon market in Africa, and within the carbon market or Article 6, we have Article 6.2, 6.4, and 6.8. The transfer of ITMOs, we also have the carbon credit, and we have the non-market mechanism. And presently, the African Development Bank is piloting the adaptation benefit mechanism in Abidjan, I think four countries in Africa, to see how they could leverage the adaptation benefits of carbon, really. And basically what has been the issue for advocacy is that not only relying on mitigation components, but also having some adaptation co-benefits. They need to have adaptation co-benefits. So we have a lot of potential. Africa have a lot of potential. We have vast amount of forests. Yeah, we also have the blue infrastructure, a wetland of mangroves, and few countries have benefited from huge projects on mangrove restoration projects in most coastal areas. We know the benefit of having mangrove, some other economic benefit and other social benefits serve as a buffer for some of these coastal communities. And so there has been a lot of support. World Bank and even the UNDP has undertaken projects through the GEF, the Green Environment Facility. How do we support climate-induced coastal risk management and having resilience infrastructure, blue infrastructure can play a critical role into that. So there has been a lot of projects when it comes to really carbon market for Africa.
All right, thank you very much for that. Okay, this is where we are going to end webinar series for January section. So we are coming back next month where we are going to be looking at another topic and be discussing entirely on climate finance and also carbon markets, where we'll be looking at how we can leverage all that in Africa, how we can have a business model that can be able to get a green fund, and how we can access those funds also in Africa. I hope everyone will also find time to join us, same time, same week, next month. So bye for now. Thank you all for joining. Thank you to Tomani. Thank you, Cleopatra. Thank you, Henry. We really appreciate your time. So bye for now. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you
Bye.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.